Most of us think we know the Bible, the stories that have been told for generations, tales of prophets walking with God, miracles that defy belief, lessons about right and wrong, and heroes whose faith was unwavering. Yet behind this familiar version, the one printed in every household and read in every church, lies a shadow world of secrets, contradictions, and passages that scholars have puzzled over for centuries, because hidden beneath the surface are stories of lust, betrayal, power struggles, and political manipulation. Narratives that were carefully edited or erased, sometimes entirely. And what's even more shocking is that some of these censored passages were considered so dangerous, so scandalous, that those in power feared what might happen if ordinary people read them. To understand why these truths were hidden, we have to travel back over 1,000 years, to a time when the Bible was not a single polished book, but a collection of scrolls, oral traditions, and fragile manuscripts, many of which have since been lost or destroyed. And as we dig into these ancient origins, we start to see a picture that is far darker and far more human than the sanitized stories we were taught as children. Because in those earliest versions, kings and priests were not only spiritual leaders, but political actors, and they often used sacred texts to justify their own power, to manipulate the people, and to protect their own secrets. While ordinary men and women lived with the consequences of these hidden truths, whether through punishment, exile, or public shame. And the stories themselves, the ones that survived, were carefully shaped to reinforce obedience and morality, hiding the messy, complicated, and sometimes scandalous reality behind divine guidance. In some of the lost manuscripts, we find hints of relationships that would shock modern readers, affairs between powerful figures and forbidden lovers that threatened entire communities, stories of betrayal within families that echo more like dramas than parables, and accounts of lust and desire woven directly into the narrative, not as sin punished, but as human impulses that shaped the course of history. Yet over time, editors and religious authorities removed these sections, rewriting the stories so that only what was considered morally acceptable, politically safe, or spiritually instructive remained. And the question that arises is whether these edits were done to protect the people or to protect those in power. Because when we read between the lines of what survives, it is impossible not to notice the gaps, the abrupt transitions, and the inexplicable omissions, all of which hint at something much darker lurking just beneath the surface. Even familiar stories, the ones most of us grew up knowing, are not as innocent as they appear. And if you listen closely to the language, the repetitions, and the small inconsistencies, you begin to glimpse the scandal that was deliberately hidden. And while it is tempting to imagine that these edits were only minor, the reality is that they often reshaped entire narratives, turning complex, morally ambiguous tales into simplified lessons of right and wrong, while silencing voices that might have challenged the prevailing order. And the implications are profound, because it means that what we call the Bible, the sacred text revered by millions, is only one version of a much larger, more complicated story, one that has been filtered through centuries of human desire, fear, and ambition, leaving us with a text that teaches, inspires, and comforts, but also conceals as much as it reveals. What makes this even more fascinating is that these forbidden stories were not always hidden intentionally in secret vaults or locked libraries. In many cases, they were simply removed over time as scribes copied manuscripts, making small changes that added up over generations, until entire passages vanished, and the echoes of scandalous truths survived only in obscure references, marginal notes, or conflicting accounts preserved in rival communities. So that scholars today must piece together fragments, sometimes only a line or a word at a time, to reconstruct a version of history that was deliberately obscured. And as we examine these ancient records, we see patterns emerging. Patterns that suggest that human desire, lust, jealousy, and power were central not only to the lives of the people in these stories, but to the very formation of the sacred text itself. Imagine a king using the word of God to justify a personal vendetta, or a priest rewriting a story to protect his own indiscretions, or forbidden romances that threatened entire dynasties being erased from the pages for fear of moral outrage. And when we uncover these hidden layers, it is impossible not to feel the tension between what is holy and what is human, between the lessons meant to guide us and the messy truths that shape the world in which these stories originated. Because the Bible, like any human creation, is not a perfect reflection of divine will, but a reflection of the people who recorded, copied, and edited it. And in that reflection, we see ambition, fear, desire, and scandal intertwined with faith, morality, and belief, creating a tapestry that is as complex as it is compelling and as beautiful as it is disturbing. And so, As we begin to unravel these hidden truths, the question that lingers, the one that keeps historians, theologians, and curious readers awake at night, is simple yet haunting. What exactly was erased to make the story pure? And what does the removal of these passages reveal about the people who shaped the Bible, about the societies that revered it, and about human nature itself? And it is this question, this tension between innocence and scandal, between what is written and what is hidden, that will guide us as we move deeper into the story, as we explore the forbidden meanings, the scandals, and the truths that have survived despite centuries of silence. Because the story that was told to the world is only half of the tale, and the real secrets, the ones that have been buried for over 1,000 years, are only just beginning to emerge. The Bible is often seen as a simple guide, a book of faith and morality. Yet when we look closer, it becomes clear that it was much more than that, because this sacred text was also a powerful tool, one that shaped beliefs, controlled behavior, and even dictated social order. And as we examine the passages that survived, we begin to notice that they are carefully polished, stories that have been sanitized to remove lust, vengeance, and rituals that might have shocked or unsettled the faithful. And beneath the surface, the raw human emotions that drove the earliest narratives, the desires, jealousies, fears, and ambitions, have been smoothed over, hidden from view, so that what remains appears orderly and divine rather than messy and human. When we trace the origins of these edits, we uncover stories of forbidden love affairs between kings, priests, and ordinary people. Romances that could destabilize entire communities and were quietly erased or rewritten. And we see accounts of brutal punishments inflicted in the name of morality or justice. Actions that reveal a world driven as much by human desire as by divine instruction. And it becomes clear that those who preserved and edited the text were not just scribes or scholars, but participants in these same dramas, people whose own ambitions and fears influenced which stories were remembered and which were buried. And as we explore these hidden layers, it is impossible not to notice the tension between the holiness the text conveys and the humanity it conceals, because the Bible, like any human creation, reflects both the ideals people aspire to and the impulses they cannot resist. The lessons that have survived teach faith, obedience, and virtue. Yet the passages that were erased tell a different story, one of lust, betrayal, and scandal. And by examining both, we begin to understand how societies decide what is acceptable to remember and what must remain secret. And we start to see that history is rarely a simple record of facts, but a living narrative shaped by fear, desire, and power. And when we read between the lines, the ugly truths that were hidden for centuries remind us that human nature is never as pure as the stories we are told. And so, as we reflect on these hidden histories, the question lingers in the mind: if even sacred stories can be rewritten, altered, or sanitized to serve human purposes, what does that reveal about morality, about the choices we make, and about the secrets that all of us, in one way or another, keep buried? Because the stories we inherit are only part of the truth, and the rest waits patiently for those willing to look beneath the surface.